Arthur kept the small wooden box on the highest shelf of his hallway closet. He had moved houses twice since his wife died, changed furniture, repainted walls, donated bags of clothes, and told his children he was learning to live simply now. But the box always came with him. It was not large. Inside were a few old photographs, a folded letter, a watch that no longer worked, and a flat gray stone he had picked up on the last morning they had walked by the lake together. He never showed it to anyone. Sometimes, when the house was quiet and the evening light began to fade, Arthur would pull a chair into the hallway, stand slowly on it, and take the box down with both hands, as if it contained something fragile enough to break. But the strange thing was, he almost never opened it. He would place it on the kitchen table. Then he would sit in front of it for a long time. The kettle would boil, the clock would move, the room would grow darker, and Arthur would keep one hand resting on the lid as though he were guarding something, or being guarded by it. To anyone else, he looked like a man remembering someone he loved. But inside, something heavier was happening. He was not only remembering, he was holding the morning by the lake, holding the words he never said, holding the version of himself that still belonged to a life that had already changed. He told himself that letting go would mean losing her again, so he kept the memory close. But the closer he held it, the less space there was for peace. Even on peaceful days, he felt troubled. Even in a quiet house, he felt watched by the past. Even when his children visited and laughter filled the kitchen, part of him remained seated alone with that box, one hand on the lid, afraid that if he opened it, grief would return, and afraid that if he put it away, love would disappear. This is how many hearts suffer in silence, not because the past is still happening, but because something inside is still kneeling beside it, refusing to rise. For many years, Arthur believed the box was a sign of love. He believed that keeping it close meant he had not forgotten. And, in a simple way, this was true. Love often leaves behind small objects because the heart cannot hold everything by itself. A photograph, a letter, a shirt that no longer carries the person's warmth, but still carries the shape of longing, a watch that stopped on no important hour, yet somehow feels sacred because their hands once touched it. But there is a quiet difference between honoring what was loved and hiding inside what was lost. Arthur did not know this difference yet. He only knew that whenever life moved forward, something in him reached backward. When his daughter called and asked if he would come for Sunday dinner, he said yes, but slowly. He would stand near the kitchen phone after the call ended, looking out at the small garden behind the house. The garden had changed since his wife died. The old rose bush near the fence had grown wild on one side. The bird feeder leaned slightly. In spring, weeds appeared between the stones of the narrow path. His wife would have noticed these things. She would have gone outside with gloves and a quiet determination, as if the whole garden could be comforted by patient hands. Arthur saw the garden every morning, but he rarely touched it, not because he did not care, because caring hurt. The rake remained in the shed. The old gloves stayed on the shelf. The rose bush kept bending under its own weight, and Arthur told himself he would tend to it another day. But another day became another season. Sometimes the heart refuses to clean what reminds it of love because dust feels less painful than change. Sometimes disorder becomes a memorial, and sometimes we let things remain untouched, not because they are sacred, but because we are afraid of discovering that life can continue without the person who once stood beside them. This was the fear Arthur carried. Not only grief, not only memory, fear. The fear that if he repaired the garden, he would be admitting she was gone. The fear that if he opened the box and touched the old photographs without breaking, then maybe some part of him had betrayed her by surviving. The fear that if peace ever came, it would mean love had ended. So he stayed loyal to pain. Many people do this without knowing. They do not say, "I am attached to suffering." They say, "I just remember." They say, "This is how I keep them close." They say, "I am not ready." And sometimes these words are honest. The heart cannot be forced open. But sometimes, beneath these words, there is a hidden belief that pain is proof. That if the ache disappears, the love will disappear too. That if the mind stops returning to the same memory, then the memory will be abandoned. So the person keeps touching the bruise. Not because it heals them, because it reminds them that something once mattered. Arthur did not understand that remembrance and clinging were not the same thing. Remembrance is like lighting a candle in a quiet room. Clinging is like holding the flame in your closed hand. One gives light, the other burns. On Sunday, Arthur went to his daughter's house. The family was gathered around the table. His grandson had grown taller again. His daughter had made soup, the kind his wife used to make, though no one said this out loud. There were small sounds everywhere. Spoons against bowls, chairs moving, children laughing too loudly in the next room, rain tapping gently against the windows. Arthur smiled when he was expected to smile. He answered when people spoke to him. But something in him remained elsewhere. At one point, his daughter placed a bowl in front of him and said, "Dad, I found Mom's recipe card in an old book." Arthur looked at the soup, then at his daughter. For a moment, the room became far away. He wanted to say something tender. He wanted to say how much her mother would have loved seeing everyone together. He wanted to say the soup smelled almost the same. But his throat closed. He nodded. Then he looked down. The conversation moved on without him. This is one of the quiet ways attachment hurts. It does not always look like grasping. Sometimes it looks like absence. The body is in the room, but the heart is kneeling somewhere in the past. The people who are still here reach for us, but our hands are full of what is already gone. And because grief feels noble, we may not notice the harm. We may not notice the living faces around us. We may not notice the cup growing warm in our hand. We may not notice that love is asking to continue in a new form while we are still trying to preserve its old shape. Arthur returned home that evening with a small container of soup his daughter had packed for him. He put it in the refrigerator. Then he stood in the kitchen and listened to the hum of the house. It was not an unhappy house. That almost made it worse. The chair by the window was comfortable. The lamp gave a soft yellow light. The rain had stopped. A thin shine of water remained on the street outside. Everything was quiet enough for peace. But peace did not come, because peace cannot enter a place where every door is guarded by fear. Arthur went to the hallway closet. He took down the wooden box again. This time, when he sat at the kitchen table, he opened it. The hinge gave a small, dry sound. Inside, the photographs lay exactly where he had left them. The folded letter, the watch, the gray stone. He picked up the stone first. It was cold, smaller than he remembered. That surprised him. For years, it had felt enormous inside him. He held it in his palm and saw again the morning by the lake. His wife walking ahead of him in a blue coat. The water pail under a cloudy sky. Her hand reaching down to pick up that stone because she said it was smooth, almost like it had learned patience from the water. He had laughed. A small laugh, the kind of laugh he had forgotten he once had. Then another memory came, not as an image, but as a pain. The hospital room, the words he could not say, the apology he kept rehearsing after there was no one left to hear it. The mind is very skilled at tying love to unfinished words. It takes one unsaid sentence and builds a prison around it. It says, "You cannot be free until the past changes." But the past does not change. So the person remains seated beside a locked door year after year, waiting for a room that no longer exists to open. There is an old story of a monk who kept a sealed jar on his windowsill. Inside the jar were dried flowers from the garden of his childhood home. He had carried them from village to village, through winter and summer, through years of teaching and walking and growing old. Every night, he looked at the jar and remembered his mother's hands placing flowers in a bowl of water. One day, a young student asked him, "Master, why do you never open the jar?" The monk said, "Because I am afraid the fragrance will be gone." The student asked, "And if you never open it?" The monk looked at the jar for a long time. Then he said, "Then I will spend my whole life guarding a fragrance I never breathe." That evening, he opened the jar. There was almost no scent left, only a faint sweetness. But as he held the dried flowers in his hand, he began to cry. Not because the fragrance was gone, but because he had spent so many years afraid of a truth he could have survived. Arthur would not have called his box a sealed jar. He would not have called his grief attachment. He was not trying to suffer. No one who clings is trying to suffer. They are trying to protect something, a person, a promise, a version of life before the breaking, a feeling they do not know how to meet without holding it tightly. This is why telling someone to let go often sounds cruel, because from the outside, letting go looks simple, but from the inside, it can feel like standing at the edge of a life you no longer recognize, being asked to place down the only familiar weight you have left. Even pain can become familiar. Even sorrow can become a kind of home. And when a person has lived inside sorrow for many years, peace may not feel peaceful at first. It may feel empty. It may feel disloyal. It may feel like stepping into a room where the old furniture has been removed and not knowing where to sit. So the heart returns to what hurts, because at least it knows the shape of that room. Arthur sat with the stone in his palm. He remembered the lake. He remembered the blue coat. He remembered the way his wife used to pause before answering difficult questions, as though she wanted to leave room for kindness. Then he remembered something he had not allowed himself to remember. On one of her last clear mornings, she had looked toward the window and said, "Don't make a shrine out of sadness." At the time, he had nodded because he thought she was talking about after. Later, he could not bear to think about it. Now the words returned without force, not as a command, not as blame, just as a small lamp being lit in a dark corner. Don't make a shrine out of sadness. Arthur closed his fingers around the stone. For years, he had believed he was protecting love. But quietly, without meaning to, he had protected grief from changing. He had kept sorrow in the same position, like furniture no one was allowed to move. He had kept the garden wild, kept the box closed, kept certain songs unplayed, kept certain stories untold, and he called this faithfulness. But faithfulness to love is not the same as faithfulness to pain. A flower does not honor the rain by refusing to bloom after it passes. A house does not honor the person who lived there by keeping every window closed. A heart does not honor love by denying itself air. In Buddhist wisdom, the suffering is not that beautiful things change. The suffering is that the heart keeps demanding they remain unchanged. The hand closes around a moment. The moment has already moved, so the hand holds only pressure. This is why attachment feels so heavy. It is not the memory itself. It is the effort to keep the memory from becoming memory. It is the effort to make what is past remain present in the same form. It is the effort to stop life at the exact place where the heart was wounded, hoping that if nothing moves, nothing else can be lost. But life moves anyway. The seasons move through the garden. Children grow taller. Soup is made from old recipes by new hands. Rain falls on streets the beloved no longer walks. And still, something tender remains. Not the same, but real. Not in the old form, but not gone. Arthur began to notice this slowly. He noticed that his daughter's soup did not erase his wife's soup. It carried it forward. He noticed that his grandson's laugh did not replace the laugh that was missing. It made room for life beside the missing. He noticed that the garden did not become less hers because the weeds were pulled. Maybe it became more alive because her care was allowed to continue through his hands. This is where letting go begins, not in throwing away, not in forgetting, not in becoming untouched by sorrow, but in allowing love to move from a closed fist into an open palm. In a closed fist, love becomes fear. Fear of losing, fear of changing, fear of breathing without guilt. But in an open palm, love becomes warmth. It can be felt without being trapped. It can be remembered without being replayed. It can guide without imprisoning. Arthur placed the stone back in the box. Then he picked up the folded letter. His hands trembled slightly. For a moment, he almost put it down again. The old fear rose. If I open this, I will break. But another part of him, quieter and older than fear, answered without words. Maybe you have already been breaking by refusing to open it. He unfolded the letter. The paper had softened at the creases. Her handwriting leaned slightly to the right. Ordinary words, A note about groceries. A reminder about an appointment. A small joke at the bottom. Nothing grand, nothing final, nothing worthy of all the fear he had built around it. And yet, as he read it, tears came. Not violent tears. Not the kind that tear the body apart, just tears that had been waiting for permission. He did not try to stop them. For the first time in a long while, he let the memory be what it was. A memory. Not a room he had to live inside. Not a debt he had to repay forever. Not a stone he had to press into his own chest to prove he had loved deeply. Just a memory. Tender. Painful. Alive in a different way. Outside, the wet street reflected the porch light. Inside, the wooden box remained open on the table. Nothing dramatic had changed. The house was still quiet. The chair across from him was still empty. The past had not returned. The loss had not disappeared. But something in Arthur had stopped pushing against the truth with both hands. And in that small space, where resistance loosened just enough, the peace he had been searching for did not arrive like a reward. It appeared like something that had been covered all along. Arthur did not close the box right away. He let it remain open on the kitchen table, as if the room no longer needed to pretend. The photographs were still there. The folded letter, the silent watch, the small gray stone resting beside them, no heavier than any other stone now, and yet still holding the shape of a morning by the lake. He touched it once more. Not with the tightness of a man trying to keep the past from leaving, but with the gentleness of someone meeting what had already left and discovering that love had not vanished with it. Outside, the rainwater slowly slipped from the leaves in the garden. Arthur looked through the window at the rose bush near the fence. Its branches were tangled, leaning under their own weight. For a long time, he had let it remain that way, as though touching it would disturb something sacred. Now it only looked tired. In the morning, perhaps, he would find the old gloves. Perhaps he would open the shed. Perhaps he would cut away what had dried, not because he was finished grieving, but because grief did not need to be protected from sunlight anymore. He folded the letter carefully and placed it back inside the box. Then he left the lid open, just slightly, enough for air to enter. The house was still quiet. The empty chair was still empty. The years did not return to him. No voice came back through the hallway. No hand reached for his. But Arthur sat there a little longer without asking the silence to become something else. For once, he did not press the stone against his heart. He let it rest on the table. And in the small distance between his hand and what he had been carrying, something softened. Not the love, not the memory, only the fear around it. The lamp glowed gently. The wooden box waited. Arthur breathed. And the room, which had held his sorrow for so long, held him without asking anything more. Stillness.